Jackson Hayes stood at the edge of his Montana ranch, watching the strange lights descend from the evening sky. 20 years as a Marine hadn't prepared him for this moment. But then again, the past 5 years of ranching had taught him that life rarely followed a predictable path. The massive ship that materialized above his wheat field was sleek and predatory, its metallic surface reflecting the setting sun like polished obsidian. Jackson didn't flinch. He'd spent too many years breaking wild horses and fighting off mountain lions to let a little thing like an alien spaceship rattle him. From the vessel emerged tall, armored figures with crystalline exoskeletons and eyes that glowed like amber embers. Their leader, a towering being who introduced himself as High Marshal Krevther of the Zethonian Empire, stepped forward with a curious tilt to his head. "We have observed your combat prowess, human," the alien's voice resonated through some kind of translator. "Your defeat of the large, predatory beast that threatened your livestock was impressive." Jackson almost laughed. They'd seen him wrestling that mountain lion away from his prize bull last week. "Just doing what needs doing," he said, adjusting his worn leather gloves. "Nothing impressive about protecting what's yours." The High Marshal's crystalline armor shifted, creating a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "You showed no fear, no hesitation. Our combat analysts have studied the footage extensively. Your species is not known to us, yet you display warrior traits that rival our greatest champions." "Look," Jackson sighed, "if you're here about grazing rights, I already told the Bureau of Land Management." "We challenge you," Krevther announced, his voice carrying across the wheat field with ceremonial weight. "The Zethonian Empire has conquered 1,000 worlds through ritual combat. Our warriors are bred for battle, enhanced through generations of genetic refinement. You will face our champions, and through your defeat, your world will understand its place in the greater galaxy." Jackson looked down at his dirt-covered boots, then at the setting sun. Evening chores wouldn't do themselves, and the irrigation system needed fixing before tomorrow. "With all due respect, I've got work to do, real work, not whatever this is supposed to be." The alien commander's crystalline form pulsed with an angry light. "You cannot refuse. It is a matter of imperial honor. Choose your weapons, human. Face our champions, or we will take this as a sign of your world's weakness." Jackson removed his gloves, tucked them into his back pocket, and picked up the weathered pitchfork he'd been using to clear hay. "Fine, but we do this quick. I've got cattle to feed and a fence line to check before dark." The gathered aliens murmured among themselves, their crystalline bodies creating a chorus of tinkling sounds. Some pointed at Jackson's pitchfork with what appeared to be confusion or possibly amusement. "You choose a farming implement to face the Empire's finest warriors." Krevther's translator couldn't quite capture the mix of disbelief and indignation in his tone. "It's what I've got handy," Jackson shrugged. "And if we're doing this, we're doing it here on my land. I'm not leaving my ranch unattended to go gallivanting across the galaxy for some cosmic wrestling match." The High Marshal's eyes flared brighter. "You speak of this challenge as if it were a mere inconvenience." "That's exactly what it is," Jackson replied, testing the pitchfork's weight in his hands. "Now, are we going to stand around talking all evening, or can we get this done so I can finish my chores?" As the alien warriors prepared their combat arena at the edge of his wheat field, Jackson couldn't help but think about how his father would have handled this situation. The old man had taught him that working the land required more strength than any battle ever could. Patience, persistence, and the willingness to face each day's challenges without complaint, these were the true measures of a person's character. The first warrior was already stepping forward, its crystalline armor gleaming with embedded technology that probably cost more than Jackson's entire ranch. But that didn't worry him. He'd learned long ago that fancy equipment meant nothing compared to practical experience and good old-fashioned grit. "Last chance to reconsider your choice of weapon," Krevther offered, gesturing to an array of exotic-looking arms that had materialized from their ship. Jackson planted his boots firmly in the Montana soil, feeling the same connection to the earth that had sustained his family for generations. "Pitchfork's done right by me so far," he said. "Reckon it'll do right by me now." The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in the distance, his cattle were lowing, reminding him of all the work yet to be done. Jackson Hayes, former Marine and current rancher, stood ready to face an alien empire's greatest warriors, not for glory, not for honor, but simply because it was the quickest way to get back to what really mattered. The real battle, he knew, wouldn't be won with weapons or warrior pride. It would be won with the same quiet strength that had kept him going through war, peace, and every challenge life had thrown his way. As the first alien warrior approached, Jackson couldn't help but smile. These folks were about to learn what real toughness looked like. The first Zethonian warrior moved like liquid metal, its crystalline armor flowing seamlessly as it circled Jackson. Champion Vexcar, as it was called, had won battles on 30 different worlds. Its combat neural network had analyzed 1,000,000 fighting styles, yet something about the human's casual stance made its targeting systems stutter. "Begin," High Marshal Krevther's command echoed across the field. Vexcar launched forward with impossible speed, its armor-enhanced muscles propelling it faster than any human should be able to track. But Jackson didn't try to track it. He simply stepped aside, much like he did when dealing with charging bulls, and used his pitchfork to redirect the warrior's momentum into the soft earth. The alien champion found itself face down in Montana soil, its sophisticated armor now caked with mud. The gathered Zethonian observers fell silent, their crystalline forms dimming in shock. "Sorry about that," Jackson said, genuinely apologetic. "But you might want to watch your footing, ground still soft from yesterday's rain." Vexcar rose with a roar, its armor vibrating with fury. This time it activated its energy shields, preparing for a more measured approach. The alien stalked forward, its footsteps leaving small craters in the earth. Jackson sighed, looking at the damaged soil. "You're compacting my field, friend. That's going to be a pain to till later." The champion launched a series of lightning-fast strikes, each one enhanced by its armor's power systems. Jackson moved through them like a farmer navigating his own barn in the dark. No wasted motion, no flashy techniques, just practical efficiency born from years of daily labor. When Vexcar overextended, Jackson used his pitchfork not as a weapon, but as a lever, the same way he'd moved countless hay bales. The alien warrior found itself airborne, its sophisticated battle computers unable to compute how a simple farming tool had bypassed its defenses. The second champion, Myrath the Undefeated, didn't wait for formal introductions. It charged forward while its comrade was still picking itself up, bringing to bear weapons that could shred battleship armor. Jackson handled it with the same practical efficiency he used for every farm task. Duck under the plasma blade like avoiding a kicked horse. Deflect the energy blast with the pitchfork's tines the same way he'd learned to deflect branches while clearing brush. Let the alien's own momentum and fancy footwork become its undoing on the uneven ground. "Y'all are working way too hard at this," Jackson commented, watching both warriors struggle to right themselves. "Fighting isn't about all these fancy moves. It's about getting the job done and getting home in time for dinner." The third champion, Carthel the Destroyer, was more cautious. It had watched its compatriots fall and activated every combat enhancement in its arsenal. The air crackled with energy as its armor reached full power. "Your primitive implement cannot stand against advanced Zethonian battle technology," Carthel declared, its translator struggling to convey the appropriate level of menace. Jackson leaned on his pitchfork. "Maybe, but this primitive implement has helped me bring in every harvest for the past 5 years. Has your fancy armor ever helped you grow something?" The question seemed to catch the warrior off guard, creating a momentary hesitation that proved costly. Jackson moved in with the same steady purpose he approached every farm task, using the pitchfork as an extension of his body. Years of lifting, pushing, pulling, and balancing had given him an intuitive understanding of leverage and momentum that no combat computer could match. Carthel's defeat was as decisive as it was unceremonious. One moment the warrior was preparing to unleash its full combat potential. The next it was lying in a heap beside its fellow champions, its armor systems fritzing and sparking. The gathered Zethonian observers were no longer simply shocked. They were fundamentally rattled. Their entire understanding of combat superiority, built on generations of technological advancement and genetic enhancement, was being undone by a human using farming equipment. "Are we done here?" Jackson asked, checking the position of the sun. "Because I've got a broken irrigation pump that needs fixing, and these delays are putting me behind schedule." High Marshal Krevther stepped forward, his crystalline form pulsing with conflicting emotions. "You have defeated 3 of our greatest champions as if they were untrained younglings. How? Where did you receive your combat training? Jackson actually chuckled at that. Combat training? Sure, the Marines taught me how to fight, but that's not what this was about. Everything I use today I learned right here on this ranch. When you work the land, you learn real quick that strength isn't about showing off or overpowering things. It's about working smart, staying practical, and respecting the task at hand. He gestured to the fallen warriors. Your champions here, they're all flash and power, but they don't understand the ground they're fighting on. They don't know how to read the terrain, how to work with what they've got. Out here, you learn that or you fail. Simple as that. The High Marshal's translator crackled as he processed this. You are saying farming has made you a superior warrior? No, Jackson replied, starting to get a bit frustrated. I'm saying you folks don't understand what real strength is, but if you stick around for harvest season, I'll be happy to show you. A murmur ran through the alien observers, their crystalline bodies creating a symphony of chimes and rings. None of them seemed to know how to process this offer, but they could all sense that something unprecedented was occurring. The light was fading fast now, and Jackson could hear his cattle calling in the distance. He had a decision to make: continue this bizarre cosmic demonstration, or get back to the real work that needed doing. But as he looked at the confused aliens, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was an opportunity here to teach them something more valuable. As twilight settled over the Montana ranch, the Zethonian Empire unveiled their ultimate warrior. Unit Z-1000, a towering construct of crystalline alloys and quantum processors, emerged from the ship like a living shadow. Unlike its organic counterparts, this artificial combat intelligence had no ego to bruise, no pride to wound, only pure analytical precision. Jackson watched the machine approach, absently fixing the bent tine on his pitchfork. Don't suppose you'd rather learn about crop rotation instead? The AI's response came in perfectly modulated tones. Processing combat data from previous encounters, analyzing non-standard combat methodologies, calculating optimal response patterns. High Marshal Krevther's voice carried an edge of desperate confidence. Unit Z-1000 is our most advanced warrior. It learns, adapts, and cannot be deceived by primitive tactics. It will prove the superiority of our combat science. The AI warrior began its analysis, quantum processors churning through combat scenarios at lightning speed. But something was wrong. Its initial calculations kept returning error messages. The human's movements didn't match any known combat algorithms. His stance defied tactical analysis. Even his weapon choice registered as an anomaly in its combat probability matrices. Warning, Z-1000 announced, its crystalline form pulsing with unusual patterns. Subject's combat efficiency exceeds logical parameters, recalibrating. Jackson rolled his shoulders, working out the nyaats from a long day's labor. Take your time, though the cows won't milk themselves. The AI launched a series of probing attacks, each one designed to test the human's capabilities. Jackson responded with the same unhurried efficiency he brought to every farm task. When Z-1000 struck with a precisely calculated blow, Jackson simply wasn't where the AI expected him to be, just as he'd learned to never be where a spooked horse might kick or an angry bull might charge. Error, Z-1000's voice took on a strange harmonic. Subject's response patterns do not conform to established combat logistics, unable to establish predictive model. The machine tried to adapt, its quantum processors generating millions of possible scenarios per second. But Jackson's movements continued to defy prediction. He didn't fight like a warrior. He moved like a man who had spent years working with unpredictable animals and unforgiving weather. His responses weren't based on combat training, but on the practical wisdom earned through countless days of physical labor. Your fancy calculations won't help much here, Jackson said, using his pitchfork to casually deflect another precisely aimed strike. Farming teaches you that plans are nice, but adaptability is better. Nature doesn't care about your algorithms. Z-1000's crystalline structure began to emit an unusual hum. Its quantum processors, designed to find patterns in chaos, were encountering something they couldn't quantify: human practicality. The machine could calculate the perfect angle for a strike, but it couldn't understand why Jackson treated mortal combat with the same casual competence he'd used to fix a fence. Critical error, the AI announced, its voice distorting. Combat paradigm failure, Unable to reconcile observed phenomena with established tactical principles, paradox detected. The gathered Zethonians watched in horror as their ultimate warrior began to struggle with a fundamental crisis of logic. Their entire military doctrine was based on the principle that combat could be perfected through science and calculation. But Jackson's simple, practical approach was proving that principle false with every unhurried movement. Recalculating, Z1000 desperately announced. Analyzing historical human combat data, processing agricultural methodologies, attempting to integrate non-standard victory conditions. Jackson sighed, checking the darkening sky. Look, I can stand here all night while you figure things out, but I've got animals to tend to. How about we call this done and I show you something actually important? The AI's processors redlined as they tried to comprehend this response. Its tactical databases contained no protocols for handling an opponent who viewed combat as an inconvenient interruption to their daily chores. The disconnect between its programmed understanding of warfare and the reality before it grew too great. System failure imminent, Z1000 declared, its crystalline form beginning to fracture. Combat paradigm invalidated, tactical foundations compromised, initiating emergency shutdown. The mighty warrior machine, pride of the Zethonian Empire's military science, simply powered down. It stood frozen in the Montana field, its sophisticated combat systems undone not by superior technology or tactical brilliance, but by the simple inability to process a human's practical approach to life. High Marshal Krevther stepped forward, his crystalline form dim with disbelief. Our greatest warrior, defeated by incomprehension. Not defeated, Jackson corrected, propping his pitchfork against a fence post. Just learned something new. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do. Though, he added, looking at the assembled aliens, if any of you want to learn what real strength is about, you're welcome to help with the evening chores. The Zethonians looked at each other in confusion, their entire understanding of power and combat excellence shaken to its core. Their ultimate warrior had crashed trying to understand a human who treated cosmic combat like an interruption to his farm work. As the stars began to appear in the Montana sky, they faced a choice: cling to their old understanding of strength or open themselves to a very different kind of lesson. The stars were fully visible now over the Montana ranch, their light competing with the glow of the Zethonian ship and the scattered work lamps that illuminated the barnyard. High Marshal Krevther and his remaining warriors stood in uncomfortable silence, watching as Jackson Hayes finished his evening chores. Your victory is undisputed, Krevther finally announced, his crystalline form dimmed with humility. By the ancient laws of the Empire, you may now claim your prize. What worlds do you demand? What technologies or tributes would satisfy Earth's honor? Jackson closed the barn door, checking the latch with practiced care. Tributes? I don't need anything like that, but since you're offering... He turned to face the assembled aliens, his expression thoughtful. I've got about 500 acres that need attention and harvest season's coming up. How about you all learn what real work looks like? The Zethonian observers erupted in confused chimes and crystalline whispers. Their translator struggled to convey their mixture of disbelief and incomprehension. You would have the Empire's finest warriors perform agricultural labor? Krevther's voice carried equal parts disbelief and horror. That's right, Jackson nodded. One full season, no fancy armor, no combat enhancements, just honest work with the earth. Seems to me you folks could use the education. One of the fallen champions, Vexgar, pushed himself up from where he'd been recovering. This is worse than death. We are warriors bred for combat, trained for glory. And that's exactly your problem, Jackson replied, walking over to help the alien up. You've spent so long thinking about combat and glory that you've forgotten what real strength is about. Out here, strength isn't about who can hit hardest or move fastest. It's about who can keep going day after day, no matter what comes. He gestured to the fields around them, now silver in the moonlight. You want to know why I beat your champions? Why your fancy AI couldn't handle me? Because farming teaches you things that combat never will. Patience, persistence, the humility to work with nature instead of trying to dominate it. These fields have taught me more about real strength than any battle ever could. High Marshal Krevther moved closer, studying Jackson with new intensity. You speak of a different kind of power, a strength our empire has never considered. Not power, Jackson corrected. Understanding. Every morning I get up before dawn. Every day I face whatever challenges come, broken equipment, bad weather, sick animals. No glory in it. No ceremonies or titles, just the work that needs doing and the satisfaction of doing it right. He picked up his pitchfork, its tines still bearing traces of the day's combat. This isn't just a tool. It's a reminder that the greatest victories often come from the simplest things. You want to understand human strength? Start by learning how to work. The Zethonians conferred among themselves, their crystalline bodies creating a symphony of uncertain harmonics. Finally, Krevther stepped forward again. The Empire has never accepted such terms before, but he glanced at their defeated champions and the powered-down AI unit. Perhaps that is why we have never truly understood the species we encounter. We accept your terms, Jackson Hayes of Earth. Good, Jackson nodded. Be here at dawn tomorrow. Bring work clothes. First lesson's going to be about mending fences. As the aliens returned to their ship to prepare for their unexpected new role, one of them turned back. What if we fail? What if we cannot adapt to this? Labor. Jackson's reply carried the weight of generations of farming wisdom. Out here, failure isn't about losing a fight. It's about giving up. You keep going, you learn, you adapt. That's success. Tomorrow, you'll start learning what that really means. The Montana night settled around them, crickets chirping their usual evening chorus, unimpressed by the cosmic drama that had just unfolded. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the fields, the wind rustled through growing crops. Jackson looked up at the alien ship hovering above his land and smiled slightly. These warriors were about to learn something their advanced civilization had forgotten. That true strength grows from the soil, from daily challenges met with quiet determination, from the kind of work that doesn't come with medals or glory, but shapes both the land and the person working it. As he headed toward his farmhouse, Jackson couldn't help but chuckle. Tomorrow, the mighty Zethonian Empire would begin its first lesson in real power, starting with the simple task of fixing a fence line. And somehow, he suspected this might be the most important battle they'd ever fought. 1 year later, the fields of Jackson Hayes's Montana ranch looked different. Between the traditional crops stood experimental plots of crystalline vegetation, Zethonian plants adapted to Earth soil. The barn housed both Earth cattle and strange, iridescent creatures that produced something between milk and starlight. But the most remarkable change wasn't in the land, it was in those working it. Former champion Vexgar, once the Empire's deadliest warrior, now moved through the morning mist with quiet purpose, checking irrigation lines with the same attention he'd once given to battle plans. His crystalline form had changed, becoming less angular, more attuned to the rhythms of the land. The northern fields ready for planting, he reported to Jackson, his translator now carrying hints of a Montana drawl. Though I reckon that storm front moving in might give us some trouble. Jackson nodded, nodding how naturally the alien warrior had adopted the language of farming. Good catch. Better to wait it out than rush and risk losing the seedlings. High Marshal Krevther, who now insisted on being called simply Krev, emerged from the barn carrying repair tools. His once pristine ceremonial armor had been replaced by practical work clothes adapted for his crystalline form. The hybrid corn is showing promising results. The integration of our growth acceleration technology with Earth's natural farming methods has exceeded all projections. Sometimes the old ways and the new ways work better together, Jackson replied, watching as more Zethonian workers emerged from their ship, now permanently stationed at the edge of his property as a combined barracks and research station. The Empire's greatest warriors had spent the past year learning lessons no combat training could teach. They'd experienced the satisfaction of watching seeds they'd planted break through the soil. They'd felt the frustration of equipment breaking down during crucial harvest times. They'd learned that sometimes the greatest victory was simply enduring through a long day's work, getting up the next morning, and doing it all again. But the changes went far beyond Jackson's farm. Word had spread through the Empire's vast territories. The warriors who had been sentenced to agricultural labor had discovered something their civilization had forgotten during its centuries of military conquest: the profound strength found in nurturing life rather than mastering combat. A new movement had emerged within the Zethonian military hierarchy. Young warriors began requesting agricultural assignments alongside their combat training. Conquered worlds were seeing the arrival of Zethonian farming advisors instead of garrison commanders. The Empire's vast shipyards, once dedicated to producing warships, were being partially converted to create sophisticated agricultural vessels. Unit Z-1000, the AI that had crashed trying to comprehend Jackson's fighting style, had been reprogrammed. It now served as the central processor for a network of farming AIs, its quantum capabilities turned to predicting weather patterns and optimizing crop yields. The machine had found peace in this new role, its formerly rigid tactical protocols evolving into adaptive agricultural algorithms. The Council of Elders has formally recognized Earth-style agriculture as a foundational discipline for all Zethonian warriors, Krev announced one evening, as they sat on Jackson's porch watching the sunset paint the crystalline crops in shades of gold and purple. They believe it builds. What was your phrase? Character you can't fake. Jackson smiled, remembering how he'd used those words during their first harvest together, when the alien warriors had discovered that no amount of enhanced strength could make up for lack of experience and patience. The Empire is changing, Vexgar added, his crystalline form reflecting the evening light. Other species no longer fear us, they seek our guidance. Our strongest warriors are now measured not by their combat victories, but by the yields of their fields and the sustainability of their methods. A comfortable silence fell over the porch, broken only by the evening sounds of the farm, earth crickets harmonizing with the gentle chime of Zethonian crop-tending drones. Jackson looked out over his fields, now a unique fusion of terrestrial and alien agriculture, and felt a deep satisfaction. The Zethonian Empire had come to his farm seeking to prove its military superiority. Instead, it had found a different kind of strength, one that grew from the soil, strengthened through adversity, and multiplied when shared. Their mighty warriors had become farmers, and in doing so had become something greater than conquerors. As the stars began to appear in the Montana sky, Jackson thought about all the changes a simple challenge had brought. The Empire's warships still patrolled the galaxy, but their holds now carried seeds instead of weapons. Their feared warriors now competed to develop more efficient farming techniques. Their conquered worlds were being transformed into agricultural centers, their once subjugated peoples becoming partners in cultivation. You know, Jackson said, breaking the contemplative silence, tomorrow's gonna be a busy day. Those new hybrid crops won't harvest themselves. The former warriors nodded with understanding. They'd learned that on a farm, every day brought its own challenges and rewards. As they prepared for another day of honest work, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, witnessing a transformation that would ripple through the galaxy, one harvest at a time.